Bertong Kunat!
Daryong Dagol!
Ano tong balitang pinagkakalat mo dito sa baluarte ko, ha?
Anong balita?
Huwag ka na magmaang-maangan pa!
Ayun ba? Ha? Hindi ba totoo naman? Nasabi ang lunas sa COVID. Alam mo ba kung nasa naman kang mayaw? Nasa naga talaga yun. At higit sa lahat, fake news talaga yung ads sa revolution.
Ungas ka ba? Ano ba pinagsasabi mo? Saan mo pinagkukuha yan?
Huh, syempre, nag-research ako, no? Sa Tuktuk University. Palibasa kasi at umugot ka na at laos, kaya hindi mo alam yun. Ano, ha?
Lord naman! Magpaulan ka naman ng katalinuhan!
Reliable source of information, sari-saring content na isinulat ng mga eksperto, mga librong di kalidad na abot hanggang sa doomsday, tumawag ka lang sa akin. By the way, hindi ako si Lord. Ako si Vibal.
O pre, tingnan mo to. Di ba sabi ko sa'yo totoong EDSA Revolution?
Oo nga, no? O tapos ito, wala pala talaga sa Naga ang bulkang mayon.
Sabi ko sa'yo eh.
Everyone! May hinahanap kami.
Naghahanap kami ng bagong teacher, Vibal.
Kailangan namin ng mga bibong guro na mahilig makipag-interact at hindi camera shy.
Game na game din sa challenges para mas maging fun and fantastic ang learning experience ng mga bata.
Kaya kung ikaw ay isang licensed professional teacher and with pleasing personality, we want you!
Mag-upload lamang ng inyong pinaka-creative na TikTok video. Pwede ninyong i-promote ang inyong city or hometown o i-discuss ang paborito ninyong lesson na makikita sa alinmang Vibal textbooks. Huwag kalimutang itag o isama sa caption ang @TikTok Paaralan at ang hashtag na #TeacherVibal.
Madali lang, di ba? At kahit na ano pa ang edad, kasarian o lahing pinanggalingan, welcome kayong sumali!
Kaya don't miss the chance! Samahan kami sa mas exciting new season ng Teacher Vibal!
Hihintayin namin kayo!
Good day, Kavibal, and welcome to our YouTube Live. For the discussion today, the topic will be on a sneak peek into the next normal classrooms, K-12 flipped classrooms, and blended learning. Before we begin, take note of the following reminders. Make sure you are registered to the webinar to have your e-certificate of participation. Visit certificate.vibalgroup.com or eturo.org to generate your proof of attendance. Share the video using #LearnAs1PH as our official hashtag to our Vibal webinars. Experience learning, Kavibal. And now, to proceed with our webinar this afternoon, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our distinguished speaker today. Miss Queenie B. Trinidad is a licensed professional teacher. She finished her undergraduate degree at National University Manila as cum laude. and is currently pursuing her master's degree in education at the La Salle University. As an education practitioner, she has been handling both administrative and teaching functions. At present, she teaches at the senior high school level at Manila Science High School. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Queenie B. Trinidad.
Mabuhay mga kabibal! I am Miss Queenie B. Trinidad, a senior high school teacher from Manila Science High School, and I will be your lecturer for today. We are going to talk about blended learning and the flipped classroom approach as I see them relevant, especially now that we are slowly transitioning to face-to-face classes. Some schools are considering blended learning as one of their learning delivery modes since it can help in ensuring that teachers and students are safe in their return. But the question there is blended learning merely about combining face-to-face and online learning delivery modes? Or does it call for a change in the way that we deliver our instruction? If so, what approaches are our options? Can we use the flipped classroom approach as another type of blended learning or as another form of blended learning? If yes, how can we implement it? What can we do? Those are the questions that I want to answer in this session. So I hope that you are ready to listen. Now, sit back, relax, and learn. I will now share my screen. All right, I hope that you can see it because we are going to have a simple warm-up activity before we begin with the lecture. So in this warm-up activity, I will be giving you fill in the blank questions and you have 30 seconds per each question to answer. Okay, so first question. Blank is a pedagogical approach that harnesses and merges the relative strengths of face-to-face and online modes of learning to create and sustain vital communities of inquiry in bringing about active learning. What do you think is this blank? Is this pedagogical approach? You have 30 seconds to answer and your timer starts now. All right, time is up and I'm seeing a lot of correct responses. And yes, the correct answer is blended learning. Yes, blended learning is a pedagogical approach that harnesses and merges the strengths of face-to-face and online modes of learning to bring about active learning. And this definition was provided by the Singapore Management University in 2022. Okay, are you ready for the next question? All right. Okay. Blended learning will enable the schools to limit blank, ensure social distancing, and decrease the volume of people outside the home at any given time. What do you think is this blank? Your timer starts now. Okay, what do you think is the correct answer? It is, it is, yes, face-to-face learning. So according to the Department of Education in 2021, blended learning in the Philippines can be used to limit face-to-face learning since the dangers of the coronavirus disease are still looming. It will also ensure the social distancing and decrease the volume of people outside the home at any given time. All right, you're doing great, guys. Okay, here's the last question. Now, this is more difficult compared to the first two questions because this is our last. All right. So, according to Bishop and Vergler in 2013, the two components of flipped classroom approach are blank and blank. I hope you are ready to answer it because the timer starts now. Okay, I hope that the time was enough for you to look for the correct answers. And the correct answers are direct computer-based individual instruction, which is done through out-of-class learning, and interactive group learning activities, which are done inside the classroom. And we are going to delve deeper into those two components later in our lecture. Okay! All right. Congratulations, everyone, and thank you very much for participating in our simple warm-up activity. So now, let us proceed with our topic for today, which is about flipped classroom and blended learning. First, I would like to ask you, have you ever thought about what it means when we say blended learning? What do you think does it mean in the 21st century? You can share your answers by typing them and sending them on our chat box. While you are typing your responses, I would also like to ask some of you, have you ever wondered when it was first introduced to education? You know, when we look back, we can trace it as early as the 1940s. And one of the first persons to implement it was actually an educator. He was an English teacher, and his name is Isaac Pitman. So during his time, there are actually other variations of distance learning, but how he implemented it in his classes resembles how we do it in the 21st century, particularly in the Philippines. Now, it was 1940s. Do you think it was really possible to do it without the computer and the internet that we have today? How do you think was it possible? You may send your thoughts on our chat box. You know, it was possible, and it was via snail mail, as done by Sir Isaac Pitman. So to tell you his story, he actually had to prepare the activities for his students and then send them via mailed postcards. And then upon receipt of the students, they will have to answer. And then upon accomplishing it, they will have to send all of those activities back to Sir Pittman for grade and for feedback. Once the grade and feedback have been given, he has to return it back to the students. Now, as I tell the story to you, I can only imagine the exhaustive and long process of doing distance learning or blended learning during the 1940s. Can you imagine too? Luckily, we are now in the 21st century where we have technology to expedite that process. Although we cannot generalize because there are students residing in far-flung areas that don't have access to technology, but most of our students actually have access to the internet and they have gadgets, particularly in the NCR. So with that said, do you think blended learning as we apply it in the 21st century would still mean the same as the 1940s? You can look back to your responses earlier. What do you think? You know, I would like to present to you 3 definitions that I hope would encapsulate what blended learning really is in the 21st century. The first definition I'd like to present to you is from the Singapore Management University in 2022. They define it as a pedagogical approach that harnesses and merges the relative strengths of face-to-face and online modes of learning. Remember these important words: harnesses and merges the relative strengths of face-to-face and online modes of learning. But what for? It's to actually create and sustain vital communities of inquiry in bringing about active learning. Remember, to bring about active learning. Now, from UNESCO's International Bureau of Education, they would define it as an approach that can offer structured opportunities to learn, which use more than one teaching or training method inside or outside the classroom, through which at least part of the content is delivered online. So from the first 2 definitions, we can see that there is now an integration of technology because it already exists in our time. So it's important that we maximize it and make it complement and help in the teaching and learning process. Now, looking at our local definition, the Department of Education in 2021 defined blended learning as a learning delivery that combines face-to-face with any or a mix of online distance learning, modular distance learning, and TV or radio-based instruction. Now, this definition is framed to actually address the health risks posed by the coronavirus disease. So they see blended learning as a delivery mode that can enable schools to limit face-to-face learning, especially now that we are encouraged to go back to schools physically. As early as September in 2021, some schools have already implemented limited face-to-face learning modality. And in the incoming school year, we are encouraged to progressively expand this face-to-face class. Now, to make sure that the students and the teachers, the whole school community can return safely, this memorandum and this order was released to provide guidelines. Now, in these guidelines, the blended learning was mentioned as one of the learning delivery mode that schools can consider to ensure that students can observe physical distancing and can minimize or make sure that physical contact is limited to make sure that we can um, stop the transmission of the coronavirus disease. Now, since blended learning will still be part of the next normal, is it just about combining online and face-to-face learning from the definitions I presented to you? You know, looking at how Singapore Management University defined it, calls for us to move beyond the traditional classroom instruction to modern classroom instruction, where the center is our students, no longer the teacher, because we have to make sure that we can bring about active learning. Now, I don't want you to get this presentation wrong. We are not invalidating the best features of traditional classroom instruction because, you know, it was the best during its time. But in the 21st century, we have to reevaluate. We have to look. Will it still work for our students today? What do you think? You know, studies would tell us many reasons why we need to move beyond the traditional classroom instruction or teacher-centeredness. But I want to hear from you. Do you agree that we should now become student-centered? Why? You can send them in our chat box. I was able to get some reasons why we have to actually move to learner-centeredness, because a teacher-centered classroom or the traditional classroom instruction have its disadvantages, especially for the 21st century learners. First, it stifles creativity. Since the teacher is the sage of the stage, it might give the wrong message, like the only way is the teacher's way. There is no other way to solve a problem but only how it was presented by the teacher. Second, it can perpetuate oppression. Why? Why do you think so? You can send them on the chat box. You know, some groups might be favored over the others because everything depends on the teacher. And you know, sometimes we are influenced by subjectiveness. So we have to make sure that all of the students are provided equal opportunity, not only our favorites. Okay. And then third, it can promote passive learning. Because, you know, during traditional classroom instruction, students are like robots. They only sit, they only listen. They don't think. They just memorize, which in turn can deprive them of the abilities for the global workforce. You know, in today's era, it's really important that students develop higher order thinking skills. That is now the requirement of the global workforce. And of course, the soft skills as well, like learning how to cooperate and work with other people. Fifth, there's a tendency that traditional classroom instruction cannot facilitate higher cognitive and metacognitive skills because sometimes, the sad reality is that there's a possibility that the focus is on grades and their performance on standardized tests rather than in application in real life situations. I would also like to share this report from the World Economic Forum. It was actually estimated that about 65% of children entering primary school will end up in jobs that don't exist yet. That is why we need to train them to become independent learners, to become critical thinkers, to become problem solvers, problems that they cannot find in books, problems where answers cannot be um, cannot be developed by just merely reading the concepts and remembering them. That's why there is a call now that we move beyond traditional classroom instruction. We have to make it right. We have to make it learner-centered. And how can we do that? What can we do? You can consider creating student-centered classrooms, as I mentioned earlier. And one of the ways to do that is through flipped classroom approach. Now, what is flipped classroom approach? According to Bishop and Vergler in 2013, flipped classroom is an approach that is technology supported. And it must have two components. The direct computer-based individual instruction, which is done outside the classroom. Second, the interactive learning or the interactive group learning activities, which is done inside the classroom. So from this definition, we can say that flipped classroom can be a form of blended learning, wherein face-to-face and online learning are used to make sure that we can bring about active learning. Now, to further entice you in trying out flipped classroom, I would like to give you an overview whether it works or not. A study conducted by Low and Hu in 2017, wherein they reviewed comparative studies of traditional classroom and flipped classroom, they were able to get the trend or to have an overview of the trends of results of those studies in terms of achievement and attitude of K-12 students. So the first trend is that students in flipped classroom actually performed overall significantly better than those in the traditional classroom. If not overall, they performed better on certain aspects like critical thinking skills and the higher order thinking skills. If no effect, I think this is still a good news because, no detrimental or inferior effect tells us that there's actually no harm in trying this out. Right? Okay. For student attitude, they found out that eventually students develop positive attitude towards flipped classroom. Why? Because they saw that it can help them prepare for class discussions through the pre-class activities like video watching. Second, it aided them in terms of interaction with their classmates and teacher during class meetings, especially that the foundation has already been built during the pre-class activities. And lastly, it offered greater opportunities to actually apply the new knowledge in problem solving. which means that active learning was brought forth. So we can say that flipped learning can actually offer promising results as well. Now, of course, it's also important that we look at the teachers, not only of the students, no? The attitude of the students. In terms of teacher attitude, Vaezi et al. In 2019 saw that teachers actually have a positive attitude in flipped classroom because they saw that it can open opportunities for immediate feedback, which means that they don't have to sit for days checking papers, giving it feedback, and then returning it when the learners are no longer interested because there is a new topic already. They saw it as a way to strike the iron while it is still hot. Second, it benefited teacher-student interaction because everybody contributes. And most importantly, it facilitated active learning. Now, if you are interested in trying flipped classroom in your classes, if you have this question in mind, how to implement it, well, lucky for us, Low and Hu in 2017 provided us the rudimentary model of flipped classroom. What I like about this model is that it's very simple and it gives us the basics of flipped classroom, which I think is really important if you are a newbie for this learning approach. So in this model, we have the out-of-class learning, which revolve around the lower order thinking skills like remembering and understanding. Now, this out-of-class learning is supported by online discussion. Now, how can we implement it? First, we have to prepare instructional videos for our learners to watch. And then to make sure or to monitor that they actually do the pre-class activities, you can task them to do content notes or online quizzes. Now, once they are in the classroom, the activities now will focus on group learning, tapping on higher order thinking skills like application and solving advanced problems. So how can you begin your classes after the pre-class activity wherein you provided them the foundation of the topic? Of course, you have to provide a brief overview. Then you can provide a short lecture only if necessary. It will always depend on the complexity of the topic or of the needs of your learners. So you also have to assess. That's why it should be supported by online discussion. Now, later on, we're going to look at how we can support pre-class activity with online discussion. Going back after the short lecture, if necessary, you can do individual practices. After which, you can do small group activities. And then conclusion and the preview of the next lesson. You can also do brief review and Q&A, then proceed to individual practices or small group activities and then individual practices, short lecture, and then conclusion. You know, it will actually depend on the needs of your class. So perhaps you should also do a bit of needs analysis before the classes begin. Okay? So now, I can see some people having doubts, no, seeing this model. Of course, the students will face challenges as you introduce them to this new learning approach. Now, Lo and Hu in 2017 provides us the challenges that most students encounter upon implementation of flipped classroom. First is the out-of-class activities. It's a problem to them because, you know, they do it alone at home, right? And sometimes the topic might be too complex for them to comprehend and they might need assistance. They might need help to better understand the topic. And how can they get help? if they are doing it alone. So that's a problem. Second, familiarity to flip classroom. You know, some students still hold conventional perspective to learning, wherein they are not prepared to share in school because they are prepared to only listen and absorb. So we have to address that too. Third is the in-class activities. You know, sometimes the students are not really prepared to work in group, especially if they are trained in a traditional classroom setting. So we have to be clear with our instruction. And you know, during in-class activity in flipped classroom, we should also think about the learners. They are learning a new approach as well as learning the course content. So we have to be very understanding. Fourth, the student workload. Some students experience time-consuming and overwhelming pre-class activities. That's also a problem for the students. And the video lectures. Sometimes the video lectures are very long and too boring. Now, what can we do so that we can address it? Lo and Who actually provided us some guidelines. And I call the guidelines to address the student-related challenges as PROUD. Okay? So the P here stands for provide platform. Okay? And it addresses, sorry for that, it addresses our first challenge for the students or the first difficulty, wherein we could provide them an online discussion forum so that they can raise their concerns, they can ask the help of their classmates, or they can share their insights about the topic. Second, we also need to have open communication. Teacher-student communication is vital to flip learning. Why? Again, this is a new learning approach. So we have to make sure that they understand why we are doing it. We have to make sure that they understand and they see the outcomes of doing a flipped classroom approach. You know, even for students that are advanced, they may really find it difficult because they are learning two things: the new learning method and the course content. That is why we have to demonstrate them, no? And we have to prepare the students gradually. No, don't present it like it's easy to learn. No, we have to be very considerate of our students. Let's prepare them for flipped classroom approach. And how can we do that? For example, no, after the open communication, wherein you have explained the benefits of flipped classroom, you can now slowly implement it in your classes. And how can you do that? For example, on Monday, you are going to present the videos, and then on Tuesday will be the small group activities, and then the other class discussion and peer activity can be done in the following days until they are ready to do it at home, until they are ready to do the out-of-class activities. Don't implement this abruptly. We have to give them an opportunity to adjust. Okay? Fourth is to retain workload. Of course, our students also have responsibilities at home, and they also have other subjects. That's why we have to estimate the required time for homework, at least 30 minutes or an hour only. Okay, so that they still have time to develop their other skills. And then fifth, this is also important, the use of cognitive theory of multimedia learning. So in designing your video lecture, make sure that it is conducive and it will keep the interest and it will engage the learners. You can do so by following Mayer's 12 design principles. But we should not forget as well that teachers might also experience difficulties in implementing flipped classroom. Law and Who was able to identify, or Law and Who rather were able to identify two challenges. First is the familiarity, because the teachers have to be accustomed to this new instructional approach, and then preparations. Since this is new, there are limited materials and preparing it would be taxing. So that's also a problem. But there are ways that we can address them. For guideline 6, it will address the sixth challenge that we have in flipped classroom. We can open, perhaps the administrators can consider opening opportunities for teachers to share their experience, no? The effective ways on how they can implement flipped classroom. They can also share where it went wrong, right? So that the team can brainstorm on how it can be addressed. Second, strengthen teacher preparation programs. Now, the training of the teachers or the seminar that we provide to them must be able to tap on developing their technological skills, because it's really now a necessity. It's no longer optional. And teacher education programs should also consider introducing student teachers with new innovations in learning approaches, so that they can try it out, or they can try each out once they are in the field and see which one works for them best. For challenge number 7, the preparation, and this is really a concern, teachers, if you implement flipped classroom to your classes, can start small. Don't force yourself. Proceed at a pace that is reasonable to you. Perhaps you can do it one at a time until all of the video materials accumulate, and then you will notice they're already complete, right? Or if you have many faculty members for one course, maybe you can flip it in team. It will make it more manageable. Okay? This one, the operational challenges. This is also very important. It's hard to implement flipped classroom if the students do not have IT resources. If they don't have internet access at home, how can they do the pre-class activities, right? Second, it's also hard to monitor the students outside the class. How will you know if they did the activity or not? Then, institutional support. The investment of schools and teachers in technological resources. Now, of course, like all of the problems that we have, there are ways to address them. And Law and Who suggest that to address the challenges or the difficulty in terms of students' IT resources, the school should consider allowing the students to extend the use of computer facilities. Or they could invest in flash drives or DVDs that students can take home and then return to school once they are done with the pre-class activities. To address how you can monitor the students, well, you can use a learning management system like the vSmart of Vibal. There are learning management systems that offer pre-made materials. You can consider that. Or you can use your LMS by providing them with online discussion forums. So this is where they could raise their concerns. Okay? Where you can also answer it when they are outside of the class, just to make sure that they have someone to assist them when they are having a difficulty in understanding the concepts during the pre-class activities. And then, of course, you can maximize gamification and other digital game elements. There are a plethora of studies that would support that digital game elements help in motivation in doing the activity. These digital game elements include leaderboards, badges, and points. Okay? I think vSmart also has this feature. Okay? And then for the last challenge that the teachers, the students, and the school might face, the institutional support, well, you can address it by advancing the school's IT infrastructure. You know, today, a school's IT infrastructure is no longer optional. It is now a necessity, especially if you are going to adopt blended learning. And lastly, schools should consider strengthening technical support for their teachers. That's the least that we can do for them to make sure that they don't have a hard time in preparing the materials and in uploading them to our learning management system. Perhaps the management can consider adding manpower to assist our teachers in their preparation. Okay, so that's it for the blended learning and the flipped classroom approach. As you've seen in our lecture today, there will be challenges, but there are ways that we can address them. So to conclude, let us sum up the things that we were able to discuss. First, blended learning fuses the best of face-to-face and other learning modalities. It can give or it offers promising outcomes. Second, flipped classroom approach as a form of blended learning is one of the learning approaches that can foster active learning. So I'm hoping that you are considering to apply this flipped classroom approach to your classes little by little until you can fully implement it. Third, teachers can tailor fit the flipped classroom approach not only for blended learning, but also for face-to-face and online learning. As we've mentioned, it can promote active learning, which is what our 21st century students need. Last, but definitely not the least, this is an important reminder to all of the educators out there. Students, teachers, and the school management will face challenges as they transition from a teacher-centered approach to a learner-centered approach like flipped classroom. Yet, there are various creative ways which we can use to address all of those difficulties, all of those challenges. After all, I am hoping that it will be worth it. I really hope that you've learned something from this lecture that you can bring to your 21st century classrooms. And if you have time today, you can actually ponder on the strategies and your techniques in your own respective classes and ask yourself this difficult question. Does it still work for my students today? You know, we do what we do because of our learners, for our learners, for our future. And with that, I leave you with one of the reminders from John Dewey. If we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. Thank you very much for listening As much as I would like to accommodate all of your questions and your insights, I'm afraid I can't because this is a pre-recorded session. Nevertheless, our Vibal team might give you an opportunity to share your insights, and they could also forward to me your questions, and I'll do my best to answer each. Again, thank you very much, and I hope to see you around.
There we have it. In behalf of Bibal Group Incorporated, I would like to thank our speaker for today for this eye-opening and insightful learning session. It is an honor to have you with us today. And to all our Kavibal viewers, all thanks to you for your continuous patronage to our daily learning session. Don't forget to register to get your e-certificate of participation. The link is in the caption of this webinar. We also encourage you to subscribe and watch on our official Vibal Facebook and YouTube channel. Muli, maraming salamat at magandang araw sa ating lahat.